The storm outside the trauma center windows mirrored the chaos that was about to erupt inside my chest, though I did not know it yet. Rain lashed against the reinforced glass of Seattle Grace's Level 1 trauma unit, blurring the city lights into streaks of weeping neon. It was a Tuesday, the graveyard shift, usually reserved for the aftermath of bar fights and slick road collisions. I was Dr. Elena Rossi, the attending trauma surgeon, a woman who had spent 25 years stitching strangers back together. I had learned to compartmentalize, to build a fortress around my emotions so that my hands would never shake when holding a scalpel. I thought that fortress was impenetrable. I was wrong. The red phone on the wall buzzed the direct line from paramedics. 2 victims, critical condition, extracted from a luxury sedan that had hydroplaned off the interstate and rolled down an embankment. ETA 2 minutes. I rallied my team, snapping gloves onto my hands, barking orders to clear Bay 1 and Bay 2. The automatic doors hissed open, admitting a gust of cold, wet air and the frantic shouting of EMTs. The first gurney rushed past, carrying a male, unconscious, intubated, his face obscured by an oxygen mask and a cervical collar. Male, mid-50s, severe blunt force trauma to the chest, possible internal bleeding, the paramedic shouted. I moved to assess the airway, my eyes scanning the patient's body for injuries. My gaze landed on the hand hanging limply off the side of the stretcher. On the ring finger sat a platinum band with a unique, braided design. I knew that ring. I had designed it myself 27 years ago. The air in the room seemed to vanish. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked up at the nurse, who was cutting away the expensive, blood-soaked dress shirt. The face revealed beneath the oxygen mask was pale, bruised, but unmistakably that of Marcus, my husband. Before my brain could process the impossibility of Marcus, who was supposed to be at a conference in Portland, lying on my trauma table, the second gurney wheeled in. Female, mid-20s, multiple fractures, lacerations, head trauma, BP dropping, another voice yelled. I turned my head mechanically. The patient's long, blonde hair was matted with blood and mud. Even through the swelling and the grime, the features were terrifyingly familiar. High cheekbones, a delicate nose. It was Isabella, my son's wife, my daughter-in-law. The room spun violently. The sterile white lights became blindingly bright. For a split second, I was not a doctor. I was a wife and a mother, standing in the ruins of my life. Dr. Sterling, the chief of surgery, stepped in front of me, his hands gripping my shoulders. "Elena," he said, his voice cutting through the ringing in my ears. "You cannot do this. You are compromised. Step back." He was right. The ethical protocols were clear. I could not operate on family. But the instinct to save, to control, fought against the shock. I nodded slowly, stepping back into the shadows of the trauma bay, watching as my colleagues worked frantically to save the 2 people I loved most in the world. But as I stood there, trembling in the corner, my eyes caught details that a non-medical professional might have missed. The smell of whiskey on Isabella's breath. The fact that Marcus's shirt was buttoned wrong, as if done up in a haste. And then, the paramedic handed a plastic bag of personal effects to the nurse. Inside, visible through the clear plastic, was Marcus's wallet and a room key card for the obscenely expensive Lakeside Manor Hotel, located just 20 miles outside the city. Not Portland, here. The surgery took 6 hours. 6 hours of pacing the waiting room, not as the respected surgeon, but as a terrified relative. My son, Lucas, arrived an hour in. He was disheveled, still wearing his pajama bottoms and a hoodie, his face a mask of pure terror. He collapsed into my arms, sobbing. "Mom," he choked out. "How did this happen?" Isabella said she was at her yoga retreat. Dad was supposed to be in Portland. Why were they together? His questions were innocent, born of a heart that had never known betrayal. I held him tight, stroking his hair, but my eyes were dry. The shock had metabolized into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I lied to him then. I told him I didn't know, that it must have been a coincidence, an emergency where one picked the other up. I protected him from the truth because I needed to be sure. I needed to see the evidence with my own eyes. When Marcus and Isabella were finally stabilized and moved to the ICU, they were placed in adjacent glass-walled rooms. They were alive, but broken. Marcus had 3 broken ribs and a punctured lung. Isabella had a shattered femur and a concussion. I sat by Marcus's bedside as the anesthesia wore off. The machines beeped in a rhythmic, hypnotic cadence. I watched his chest rise and fall, the chest I had rested my head on for nearly 3 decades. I reached for the plastic bag of his belongings, which had been left on the side table. My hands, usually so steady, trembled as I opened it. I bypassed the wallet and went for the jacket pocket. Inside, I found the hotel receipt, a suite. Champagne and caviar ordered to the room at 4 p.m. Checkout was supposed to be the next morning. But there was something else, a small, velvet jewelry box. I opened it. Inside lay a diamond tennis bracelet. It was exquisite, far more expensive than anything he had bought me in years. But it wasn't the cost that made me nauseous. It was the engraving on the inside of the clasp, for my ageless muse. It was the nickname he used to call me when we were dating. He had recycled his affection. He had stolen the language of our love to gift it to the woman who was married to our son. I snapped the box shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. At that moment, the grief died. The fear died. What remained was a cold, clinical rage. I was a surgeon. I knew how to cut out the rot to save the patient, and I realized then that my life was the patient, and the rot was deep. I did not confront them when they woke up. That would have been too easy, too messy. I needed a plan. I needed to ensure that when the truth came out, it would be absolute. There would be no gaslighting. No, it's not what it looks like. So I became the perfect caretaker. When Marcus opened his eyes, groggy and pain-rilled, I was there, smoothing his forehead with a cool cloth. "Elena," he rasped, panic flaring in his eyes. "What happened?" I smiled. A soft, terrifyingly gentle smile. "You were in an accident, darling. The car hydroplaned. You're safe now. I'm here." I watched his blood pressure monitor spike. He was terrified, I knew. He waited for the accusation. But I gave him nothing but soup and sympathy. I played the same role with Isabella. I went into her room, adjusted her traction, and brushed her hair. She looked at me with wide, fearful eyes, like a deer caught in headlights. "Mom," she whispered, "is Marcus okay?" I nodded benevolently. "He's going to make a full recovery, just like you. Isn't it a miracle? Both of you, surviving such a crash. God must have a plan for you." The guilt on her face was palpable, a living thing crawling beneath her skin. I fed off it. I watched them sweat. I listened to their fabricated stories. Marcus claimed he had come back early from Portland to surprise me, but ran into Isabella, who had car trouble on the highway. Isabella claimed she was heading to her retreat, but her car broke down and Marcus saved her. Their lies were clumsy, uncoordinated. They hadn't had time to get their stories straight. Lucas believed them. My sweet, naive son wanted so desperately to believe that the 2 people he loved were heroes, not villains. He sat by Isabella's bed, holding her hand, crying tears of relief. He thanked his father for saving his wife. Watching Lucas pour his gratitude onto the man who was sleeping with his wife was the hardest part. It took every ounce of my willpower not to scream the truth right there. But I knew Lucas. If I told him now, without undeniable proof, they would spin it. They would make me look like the jealous, crazy mother-in-law. They would manipulate his soft heart. No, Lucas had to see it. He had to witness the betrayal with his own eyes to be truly free of her. Discharge day came 2 weeks later. Because of their injuries, both required significant home care. I insisted they both recover at our large estate in the Seattle suburbs. "We have the room," I told Lucas. "And I am a doctor. Who better to care for them?" Marcus tried to protest, claiming he didn't want to be a burden, but I insisted. I wanted them under my roof. I wanted them in my domain, where I controlled the environment. I moved Isabella into the guest suite on the ground floor because of her leg. Marcus was in our master bedroom upstairs. Lucas took time off work to be there, running between his wife and his father, exhausted but devoted. The atmosphere in the house was suffocating. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, observing. I saw the looks they exchanged when they thought no one was looking, glances of longing mixed with terror. I saw Isabella texting furiously on her phone, and Marcus checking his watch. They were addicted to each other, and the proximity was driving them mad. I decided to aid their destruction. I hired a private investigator, a former cop named Miller, whom I had treated years ago. I didn't need him to find out if they were cheating. I needed him to document it. I needed high-resolution audio and video. I had Miller install micro cameras in the living room and the guest suite while they were at physical therapy. The waiting game began. I played the exhausted wife. I told them the hospital was demanding more shifts from me, that I would be gone for long stretches of time. I left the house for hours, sitting in my car a few blocks away, watching the feed on my tablet. For the first few days, they were cautious. But lust is a powerful drug, and they were arrogant. They thought I was the oblivious, working poor doctor who was too busy saving lives to notice her own life falling apart. On a Thursday afternoon, while Lucas was out picking up prescriptions, the dam broke. I watched on the screen as Marcus limped down the stairs. He went into the guest suite. Isabella was sitting up in bed. He didn't say a word. He just closed the door. The camera inside captured everything. The desperate kissing, the hushed whispers. "I can't stand him touching me," Isabella whispered, referring to my son. "I just close my eyes and pretend it's you." Marcus stroked her face. "Soon, baby. Once the settlement comes through from the accident insurance, we'll have a nest egg. I'll divorce the old hag, and we can leave." The old hag. That was what 27 years of marriage, of supporting him while he built his firm, of raising his son, amounted to. I recorded it all. I backed it up to 3 different cloud servers. I had the smoking gun. Now, I needed the execution. Isabella's 30th birthday was approaching. It was the perfect stage. Lucas, desperate to cheer her up after the accident, wanted to throw a small, intimate gathering. "Just family and a few close friends," he said. "She's been so depressed." I encouraged him. "Let's make it a surprise," I suggested. "She loves surprises. Why don't you take her out for a drive to look at the sunset while I set up the house? I'll invite her parents, your cousins, and the neighbors she likes." Lucas hugged me, thinking I was the best mother in the world. He had no idea I was arranging the funeral of his marriage. The day of the party was overcast, the gray sky pressing down on the house. I had sent Lucas out with Isabella on a scenic drive to the coast, forcing them out of the house for 4 hours. Marcus stayed behind, claiming his ribs were aching too much to sit in a car. This was the window I knew he would use. I told Marcus I had an emergency surgery and would be gone until just before the party started. I left the house, but I didn't go to the hospital. I went to the end of the block and waited for Miller. Miller arrived with the tech setup. We weren't just going to play a recording, we were going to broadcast. I had linked the living room's massive smart TV to the hidden camera feed in the master bedroom, my bedroom. I knew that the moment I left, Marcus would call her. I was betting on their arrogance. Sure enough, 10 minutes after Lucas drove Isabella away, Marcus was on the phone. The audio picked up his voice. "Come back early. Drop the idiot off and tell him you have a migraine. I need you." The plan shifted slightly. I needed them together in the house before the guests arrived, but I needed Lucas to walk in on it. I texted Lucas, "Emergency at the hospital, I'm running late. Guests are arriving at 6. Please get back by 5:30 to help Dad set up." I knew Isabella would seize this chance. She would complain of pain, make Lucas bring her home, and then send him out for something ice, pills, anything, so she could be with Marcus. At 5 p.m., Lucas's car pulled into the driveway. I watched from down the street. He helped Isabella inside. 5 minutes later, Lucas came out, looking frazzled, and drove off toward the pharmacy. The trap was sprung. I waited 2 minutes, then signaled Miller. I drove back to the house, parking silently. I unlocked the front door, but didn't enter. I waited for the guests. They arrived promptly, Isabella's pretentious parents, her best friends, our neighbors. I greeted them on the porch, finger to my lips. "It's a surprise," I whispered. "Isabella is resting inside. Let's all go in quietly." We filed into the living room. The house was silent. Where is she? Isabella's mother whispered. I picked up the remote control for the television. I prepared a little video montage of Isabella's life. I announced, my voice steady, though my pulse was thundering. Let's watch while we wait for Lucas to get back. I pressed the button. The huge 85-inch screen flickered to life. But instead of childhood photos of Isabella, the screen showed a live feed of my master bedroom. The image was crystal clear. Isabella was there, not in her room, but in my bed. She was naked, straddling Marcus, who was also unclothed. The sound was high fidelity. The moans, the wet sounds of skin on skin, filled the living room, drowning out the gasp of the crowd. Oh my God, someone screamed. It was Isabella's mother. She dropped the gift she was holding. Glass shattered on the hardwood floor. On the screen, the noise from downstairs must have finally registered. Marcus froze, looking toward the bedroom door. Did you hear that? He asked. Isabella laughed, a cruel, throaty sound. It's probably just the wind. Don't stop. I need to forget about your pathetic son. The silence in the living room was absolute, heavy with horror. At that exact moment, the front door opened. Lucas walked in, carrying a bag of ice and a bottle of pain medication. Mom? I saw the cars. Is the party? He stopped. He looked at the guests, who were staring at him with expressions of pity and devastation. Then he looked at the screen. I saw the moment his soul broke. He dropped the bag of ice. He stared at the image of his wife and his father, entwined in the bed he had grown up jumping on. The color drained from his face until he looked like a corpse. He didn't scream. He didn't rage. He just made a low, animalistic sound of pain that I will never forget. I stepped forward and pressed the intercom button on the smart home system. My voice boomed into the master bedroom upstairs. Smile, you two. You have an audience. On the screen, chaos erupted. Marcus scrambled backward, falling off the bed, tangling himself in the sheets. Isabella screamed, pulling a pillow over her chest, staring wildly at the ceiling as if looking for the voice of God. Get dressed, I commanded, my voice cold steel. And get downstairs. Now. The minutes that followed were excruciating. The guests did not leave. They were paralyzed by the spectacle. When Marcus and Isabella finally descended the stairs, hastily dressed and disheveled, they walked into a wall of judgment. Isabella saw her parents and burst into tears, reaching out to her mother. Mom, please, let me explain. Her mother stepped back, revulsion twisting her features. You are disgusting, she spat. Marcus tried to muster some authority. He looked at me, his eyes filled with hatred. You planned this. You crazy bitch, you set us up. I didn't make you sleep with your son's wife, Marcus, I replied calmly. I just turned on the lights. Lucas walked up to them. He stood before his father. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to lie again, but Lucas silenced him with a look of such profound disappointment that it was worse than a punch. You are dead to me, Lucas whispered. Then he turned to Isabella. Get out, both of you. Get out of my house. This is my house, Marcus roared, trying to regain ground. Actually, I interjected, pulling a document from my purse. It's not. The morality clause in our prenuptial agreement, which you signed 27 years ago and probably forgot about, is very specific about infidelity, especially infidelity that results in public scandal. And the deed to this house? It's in my name. My father bought it for me before we met. You are trespassing. The police arrived shortly after I had called them beforehand, citing a domestic disturbance. They escorted Marcus and Isabella off the property while the neighbors watched from their lawns. The party was over. The marriage was over. The family was incinerated. The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyers and logistics. I filed for divorce immediately. Lucas filed the next day. The video evidence made the proceedings swift and brutal for them. Marcus was ruined. In the divorce, he got almost nothing. His reputation in the architectural community was destroyed as news of the scandal spread. Clients didn't want to work with a man who seduced his own daughter-in-law. Isabella was cut off by her parents, who were too humiliated to associate with her. They left Seattle separately, fading into the oblivion of mediocrity. But victory tasted like ash. I was left in a large, empty house with a son who was a shadow of his former self. Lucas stopped eating. He stopped working. He sat in his room, staring at the rain. I realized that my revenge, while just, had not healed us. It had only cauterized the wound. We needed to heal. "Pack your bags," I told Lucas one morning, 3 months later. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Somewhere the sun shines," I said. We moved to Charleston, South Carolina. It was as far from Seattle as we could get without leaving the continent. I bought a crumbling historic mansion near the Battery that needed love and attention, a project. I retired from trauma surgery. I didn't want to see broken bodies anymore. Instead, I opened a small, free clinic for the underprivileged in the community. Lucas, needing something to do with his hands, took charge of renovating the house. It was hard at first. The ghosts of the past followed us, but the slow, humid air of the South and the rhythmic crashing of the Atlantic Ocean began to work their magic. Lucas started to smile again. He befriended a local woman, a librarian named Sarah, who had a laugh like wind chimes. She didn't know his history, and he didn't burden her with it. He learned to be Lucas again, not the victim of a tragedy. As for me, I found peace in the simple act of healing people who truly needed it. One afternoon, sitting on the porch of our restored home, drinking sweet tea and watching the Spanish moss sway in the breeze, I realized I hadn't thought about Marcus in weeks. The rage was gone. The fortress I had built around my heart had crumbled, but what grew in its place was a garden. I learned that revenge is a double-edged sword. It cuts the perpetrator, yes, but it also bleeds the victim. The satisfaction of exposing them was fleeting. The true victory was not in their destruction, but in our survival. We rebuilt ourselves, brick by brick, into people who were stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. The lesson I carry with me, and the one I offer to you now, is this: betrayal is a fire. You can let it burn you to ash, or you can let it forge you into steel. But you cannot stay in the fire. You must walk out. You must choose to leave the burning house behind, no matter how many memories it holds. Your worth is not defined by those who couldn't see it. It is defined by the courage it takes to start over when you have nothing left but your dignity. In the end, the best revenge wasn't the video, or the divorce, or the public shaming. The best revenge was the quiet, sunny Tuesday in Charleston when Lucas told me he was going to propose to Sarah, and I realized that we were happy. We were genuinely, uncontrollably happy. And somewhere, far away in the rain, Marcus and Isabella were just miserable strangers who used to know us. That was the only victory that mattered.